Not for me. The fragrance community treats those three words as a cop-out. The thing you say when you have nothing useful to contribute. The review equivalent of a shrug from someone who couldn't be bothered. I want to argue the opposite. Not for me is the most honest position in fragrance criticism. The foundational assumption of the entire review culture, that one person's sensory experience of a fragrance reliably predicts another person's, is not well supported by science. The reviewer's nose is not your nose. Their genetics are not yours. Their skin is not yours. Their memory associations are not yours. And the science on this is not vague or contested. It's specific, peer-reviewed, and frequently ignored by a community that has built an entire economy around the idea that taste transfers. Not for me is not the weakest review. It's the most honest one. The problem is not reviewers say it too much. The problem is what they do instead. Humans have more than 400 olfactory receptor genes. Roughly 3% of the entire genome is dedicated to smell, which tells you something about how much evolutionary priority was placed on that. But the more significant fact for fragrance criticism is that these genes vary between individuals in ways that produce genuinely, measurably different sensory experiences of the exact same molecule. In 2007, a study published in Nature identified a specific olfactory receptor gene, OR7D4, whose variants directly determine how individuals perceive androstenone, a steroid compound found in human sweat. Now, depending on which version of OR7D4 you carry, androstenone smells sweaty and urinous, sweet and almost floral, or like nothing at all. Same molecule, genuinely different experience, determined by one of those 400 genes. A 2018 follow-up in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences extended this finding across the full receptor range, concluding that genetic variations affect not just detection thresholds, but the perceived pleasantness of odors. Two people with different receptor genetics aren't just more or less sensitive to smell, they may find it genuinely pleasant or genuinely unpleasant. And this isn't about preference. This is about the literal signal your olfactory receptors are sending to your brain being fundamentally different from the signal someone else's are sending to theirs. You are not smelling the same thing and disagreeing about it. You may be smelling different things entirely. Now, apply this to specific aroma chemicals. Take isoe super, the synthetic woody molecule covered in episode 2. It's completely undetectable between 20 and 25% of the population. Not faint, undetectable. A reviewer with an isoe super blind spot reviewing Fahrenheit or Molecule 01 is reviewing a fundamentally different fragrance than the one detected at a full intensity by a reviewer without that same blind spot. They may not even know this. Most don't. The review goes up, you read it, you buy a bottle, and wonder why it smells like expensive tap water. Ambroxan, dominant aroma chemical in mainstream masculine perfumery, is undetectable to a different 20% of the population. Two molecules, two non-overlapping blind spots, together covering a significant portion of what contemporary fragrance actually smells like. When someone tells you they can't understand the Sauvage hype, there's a non-trivial chance the answer is physiological rather than aesthetic. This is not a criticism of anybody's nose. They are doing their honest best with the sensory equipment they were issued. It's a criticism of the criticism culture that treats individual sensory experiences as universally transferable, when the science is quite clear that it's not. Now, beyond receptor genetics, there are specific notes in perfumery that interact differently with different notes for reasons that are documented, predictable, and almost never discussed. These are not arbitrary personal dislikes. They are physiological realities, and if a reviewer cannot identify them, their negative reaction tells you almost nothing useful. Take saffron. It's one of the most polarizing notes in contemporary perfumery. Saffron character comes partly from safranol, warm, spicy, slightly honeyed, and partly from indolic compounds that accompany it. Indole is the molecule responsible for the heady depth of white florals and for the character of fecal materials at higher concentrations. Now, people who perceive indole strongly read saffron-heavy fragrances as medicinal, barnyard adjacent, or uncomfortably biological. People who are less sensitive to indole read the exact same fragrance as warm, opulent, and deeply luxurious. The reviewer who says it smells like a hospital pharmacy and the reviewer who says it smells like the inside of a velvet jewelry box are both accurately reporting their experience. Neither review transfers to your nose without knowing what your indole threshold is. Iris, derived from orris root, the powdery, cool, slightly waxy character, is read by some noses as the absolute height of elegance, and by others as aggressively soapy, cold, and reminiscent of vintage face powder in an unwelcome way. There is no correct reading of iris. There's only your reading of iris. If a reviewer tells you it's perfect without telling you where they sit on the powder spectrum, they have given you insufficient information. Civet and animalics. Fecal in isolation, musky and sweet when appropriately diluted, and where that threshold sits varies considerably between people. Concentrations that read as warm and sensual to one nose reads as unwashed to another. Both noses are functioning correctly. The fragrance is just doing different things to each of them. A reviewer who reacts with horror to an animalic oriental and cannot identify why is providing less useful information than the one who says, quote, "The civet accord sits at concentration I find too animalic. If you tend toward that register, you may find it perfectly calibrated," unquote. Clary sage. I love clary sage, one of my favorite notes. Earthy, herbal, faintly musky. People without positive associations find it damp or medicinal. People who love it, like myself, find it grounding and complex. The note is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The problem is not the note. The problem is the reviewer encountering the unfamiliar and responding to their own surprise rather than the fragrance. And the pattern is consistent across all of these. Notes that polarize do so because of genuine physiological variability. The reviewer's job, when encountering a note that creates a strong negative response, is not to perform a response for the camera. It's to identify the note, explain what it's doing, and give the audience information they can calibrate against their own nose. That's useful criticism. Anything else is autobiography. And here's what useful criticism is not. And I've read these. This smells like a dirty diaper. I nearly gagged. Whoever thought this was a good idea needs to be stopped. These are reactions, not reviews. There is a meaningful distinction between those two things that the fragrance community has largely stopped maintaining, partly because reactions generate clicks and comments and shares, and partly because the community has convinced itself that dramatic disgust is a form of honesty, and it's not. Reactions tell you about the reviewer. A review tells you about the fragrance. The dirty diaper comment tells you that the reviewer encountered a note, probably high indole, possibly an animalic accord, conceivably a synthetic musk, that reads differently on their skin chemistry, and that produced an unpleasant response. It tells you nothing about what the note is, why it's in the fragrance, who might enjoy it, or what kind of nose would read it differently. The information content is approximately zero. And the gagging is worse. It is a reviewer making themselves the subject of the review, their response, their experience, their performance. It's maximally engaging as content. It is, as a purchasing guide, useless. So the question worth asking is, why did they review this at all? If a reviewer genuinely cannot stand high indole, if saffron and civet reliably produce a response in them, they are not the right reviewer for a saffron forward oriental. Reviewing it anyway, performing that disgust, and then posting it as useful content is the equivalent of a film critic who hates horror spending 15 minutes describing to you how scared they were. The discomfort is real. The review, useless. The most honest thing a reviewer can do when they encounter a category that consistently produces strong negative responses is to say so clearly, explain the specific note causing that response, and step back from reviewing it in that category. More honest, more useful, considerably less viral. All of which brings us back to the not for me. Fragrance is subjective in a way that most aesthetic experiences are not. Music is subjective, but two people can listen to the same recording and argue about the same sonic event. Film is subjective, but two people can watch the same cut. Fragrance gives you no shared reference. The molecule is the same. The experience of the molecule is not. Every review is, at some level, an act of translation across an unbridgeable sensory gap. The most sophisticated thing fragrance criticism can do is acknowledge this, not as a disclaimer or a hedge, but as the actual foundation of that enterprise. This is what I smelled. This is how I experienced it. Here's the specific note I find challenging and why, and who might feel differently. That is more useful than any amount of confident universalizing from a nose that is like all noses singular. There's also real differences in how people prefer to present themselves through fragrance. Someone who wears it as a private pleasure, something they smell on their own skin, nobody else needs to notice, has a fundamentally different criteria than someone who wears it as a social signal. Someone who values restraint will read fragrance that projects 3 meters differently than someone who considers that a minimum. These are not weaknesses of preference that education can correct. They are legitimate adult choices about how a person wants to move through the world. A review that doesn't account for this is incomplete. The reviewers who get this right tell you who they are before they tell you what they think. I tend toward heavier orientals and find anything aquatic borderline invisible. That's 1. I'm sensitive to high indole and this affects my reading of animalics. That's 2. I wear fragrance quietly and anything that announces itself will lose me. That's 3. Those sentences are more valuable than any amount of words about a specific fragrance because they give you the calibration to translate the review into something applicable to your own nose. Fragrance criticism is not about establishing objective truth. It's about mapping one's nose experience clearly enough that another nose can triangulate themselves from it. Not for me, done properly with a specific account of what note is causing the response, why, and who might experience it differently, is a map. The dirty diaper comment is noise. It's bullshit. Your nose is a biological instrument shaped by roughly 400 variable genes, a lifetime of olfactory experience, a specific skin chemistry, and a particular set of associations between smell and memory that no one else shares exactly. It's like a fingerprint. It's yours. It's not a standard. It's not universal. The same is true of every reviewer whose content you consume, mine included. Their nose is not your nose. Their indole threshold is not yours. Their reaction to saffron or iris or civet is not a reliable guide to your reaction. Their confidence in their assessment does not make it more transferable. It makes it more persuasive. Those are different things. Not for me is the beginning of an honest fragrance criticism, not the end of it. What follows is the useful part. The note, the accord, the specific quality that creates the response, and the audience who might feel differently. Without that information, it's just a shrug. With it, it's the most useful thing a reviewer can offer you. The dirty diaper comment is the worst review in fragrance, not because it's negative, because it's useless. And the fragrance community has spent a decade rewarding it with engagement. Stop.